So yeah, 2016 has come to an end. Wow, sure time does fly. Ignoring the awful decisions and the terrible fates, for me in my personal life, I'm just gonna say that 2016 was an improvement over 2015. But still, they can't top 2014. This year has been full of a lot of good experience. I met new friends, I'm becoming more skilled in video making and in art, slowly. And of course, I'm just gonna say that it was a good year for the channel. Even that it wasn't a lot of videos this year, it's sure the production was awesome. But I do understand why you don't like this year. Probably because of the terrible events that happened this year and the awful decisions that we had. But hey, I'm just gonna remember you that I see a good year or a bad year depending on what happens in my personal life. So yeah, bad year for humanity, but for me in my personal life, it was a good year. Alright, I know you're not here for my opinion this year. You're here because I'm just gonna tell you the top 10 best AGK episodes I did this year. Keep in mind this list was organized by my fans. Not me, the fans. Pretty much they told me what was the good episode and what was the masterpiece episode. So, with 60 votes, let's see what are the episodes that people enjoy the most. Number 10. Unfortunately, with only one vote, AGK makes a pivot video gets the number 10 spot. I think the reason why this episode isn't the strongest one on the list is because a lot of people didn't find it funny as previous and posterior episodes. It has a really simple plot and kind of a cliche execution, and probably the length isn't enough to pay it off. But I think it didn't stop this episode from being good among AGK fans. They were satisfied with the result. My experience with this one, well, I barely had material to turn into a funny one. And it came out a result between decent and good. Pretty much I see why this is not the highest on the list. Number 9. With 2 votes, AGK plays Slender gets the number 9 spot. I think a lot of people just find it to be your typical AGK episode. Just to pass a little bit of time, and that's pretty much it. They are okay with that. Fans find it that it has the good amount of jokes, a simple but effective story, and probably a really hilarious ending. My experience with this episode? Well, I had a good time making it, and surprisingly enough, it only took me 1 day to edit everything. That's right, this one has the feeling of 2015. Let me explain. After I uploaded one, I go to make the next one and release it the next day. Crazy, huh? Overall, an old school AGK episode well received by fans. Number 8. With 2 votes, AGK gets his report card, gets the number 8 spot. I think I have enough reasons why this is number 8. In the complaint side, some of the fans might find this episode to be dated, since this kind of plot has been seen in AGK already. However, this complaint of the episode having a dated plot is actually hiding in the shadows with a positive, with the hilarity of the nonsensical scenes this episode offers. However, one aspect that actually divides fans is the ending. Some of them might find it cruel to Lipple, or find it hilarious because of the unexpected Smash Brothers joke at the end. My experience with this one? Well, I had little material for hilarious jokes, but enough one to actually make simple funny jokes. Which brings the charm of working in this kind of episodes, which you can add hilarious jokes into dated episodes and make a cliche plot less cliche. Overall, fans might or not like some scenes, but they all can agree that it's a fun ride. Number 7. With 3 votes, AGK goes to winterworld.com gets the number 7 spot. Here's an interesting one to talk about, since it's the Screamer episode, part 1. One of the many highlights of this episode for the fans are actually the reaction that Lipple gives during and after the Screamer. But pretty much they have the complaints that it kinda gets repetitive. But you're wondering why this episode is higher if it has a major complaint. Well, it's simple. Fans find this episode to be interesting because it revives one memory of their childhood, and it's being scared by one of these screamers. A lot of people tend to remember that they hated this kind of stuff, but now they look back and actually have a good laugh. I even got one comment that actually affects me to recovering one lost memory. That's how this episode actually got an extra vote. That is why on the 7th spot. My experience with this one? I didn't have emotion working on it, but actually the charming part comes from I actually revive an old episode and better things up, with more jokes, better execution, and a more interesting cliffhanger than the old episode. Overall, an episode that fails to actually deliver the scares, but actually delivers the childhood memories. Number 6. With 3 votes, AGK gets a British nanny gets the number 6 spot. A lot of my fans say this episode was my official return to AGK after this episode was in production for 5 months. Yes, that's right, 5 months on production. And I don't blame them, I was actually working with every single detail to make this a good episode. Most of my fans say that the jokes had them laughing harder than ever, and that the plot was actually original and kind of a funny one. But I heard a common complaint about fans with this episode that it's a little bit cruel. And I'm just gonna say I agree, I kinda taking too far in this one. My experience with this one? Well, I had a lack of interest and inspiration to make videos when I started making this one. But pretty much when that interest came back, I actually was excited to release this episode. And when I released it, I was happy that most of my public, besides the other people that were rushing me, the rest of the fans, that is a lot, like 98% of them, they waited 5 months until I released this episode. No, that's what I call a true fan. They actually prefer to wait that I take 5 months of making this episode so I can bring them a good one. So yeah, this is a special episode between fans and me. Overall, a fun ride that actually helped to get inspiration up. Number 5. With 5 votes, AGK Watches the Kayfy commercials gets the number 5 spot. One complaint from the fans is that, like the Winter episode, it kinda gets repetitive. But the reason why this one had 5 votes is because I think a lot of people find this one funnier than the previous one. And of course, some of the screamers can actually get them. And I agree. The only KV commercial that still gets me is the golf one. So yeah, this episode had people laughing and jumping out of their seat. But I think people is a little bit mixed in the ending. Why? It's a little bit cruel to people, but actually get the comeuppance to the bad guy that sent him the screamers. My experience with this one? Well, the same turn as the Winter Road episode, only that I was remaking one of my most popular old episodes. In conclusion, an episode that delivered the scares and the laughs. Number 4. With 6 votes, AGK vs Stephen Quire, again, gets the number 4 spot. We are now digging into the good ones. People say that this episode had hilarious jokes, the Smash Bros battle was awesome, and it had an interesting and original execution. So yeah, this episode was a good way to say goodbye to summer. Because this episode was released a day before I entered to high school again. My experience with this episode? I had fun making the animations and editing the sounds. It was a fun episode to edit. And of course, a good way to say goodbye to my summer and entering into school. So yeah, this episode is a fun ride from beginning to end. Number 3. With 7 votes, AGK Watches Fred gets the number 3 spot. Most AGK makers say that this kind of plot is overused to death. And I'm just gonna say I agree. But just because it's overused doesn't mean it can be a good episode. And pretty much judging by the votes this episode got, it actually shows that you can make an overused plot still fresh as new. People say that the new jokes are hilarious, that the execution was original and fresh, and that the ending is weird as hell that is funny. My experience with this episode? Well, even though this is a simple episode, I had fun making Lipple's reaction to Fred's some funny antics, and I had even more fun editing the ending. Trust me, the ending is probably the main highlight of this episode. Overall, this episode shows that an overused plot can actually make a fun ride. Number 2. I'm shocked with the result of this one, And with 14 votes, AGK runs away, gets the number 2 spot. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I thought this one was going to be the number 1 spot, but no, I think people prefer another episode than this one. But anyways, this doesn't mean it's a bad episode or just simply good. It's actually a really well received episode of this year. People actually sees the many work that this episode went, because it has hilarious jokes. It's awesome to see a big cast for an episode. The one-liners and hilarious scenes were memorable. The plot is interesting and the execution was amazing. Not only that, but fans are not divided by the ending. They actually agreed that it was a good ending to Leopold and actually gave him a good moral at the end. People really loves this episode, and they find it one of my best ones. Not only from this year, but actually from the entire series. And it made me happy that a lot of people love a hard-working episode. My experience with this episode? Well, even though it was a hard episode to make, 17 minutes to be exact, it was a blast to make. I was happy to see my ideas for this episode turn real. I even laugh at the exaggerated scenes I made. Hell, this episode became one of my favorites of how it turned out. Pretty much, it's one of my 10 favorite episodes I made for my series. So, in conclusion, episode 95 is a fantastic episode. A fun ride, a really charming adventure, and of course, one beloved episode. And number 1 is... With 16 votes, AGK tries to fix his computer, gets the top spot. I'm just gonna say by many, this is actually the fan favorite of this year, and I can clearly see why. People found the jokes to be really hilarious that it's hard to not laugh at them. It has a really fully interesting plot, which is also original. The execution of the story was interesting for a simple episode. And the ending is also liked by people because it gave a weird but good ending to Leopold. The reason I think why people like episode 93 better than 95 is because it has a more simple way to tell the story. And pretty much we can all relate what is wrong with doing what Leopold is not doing right. That's pretty much why people found it funnier. They know Leopold is doing it wrong. And the way the exaggeration and results that his action does is actually a highlight for them. Even modern AGK fans find this to be a really good old school AGK episode. That's pretty much why it got a little bit more of the votes and made it the winner of this top 10. My experience with this episode is the same like 95. I had a blast editing the silliness and randomness of this episode. And I'm actually happy that this episode really has a high reception between fans. And it makes me happy that a really hard-working episode I had a blast really is a blast for viewers. So, in conclusion, episode 93, AGK fixes his computer, gets the number 1 spot for being a really enjoyable episode. Well, that was a surprising and actually interesting list to put together. Alright guys, it has been Pony Video Maker and I see you in 2017 with new videos. Hopefully.